Let's go to the text. Here at the start of the last part of the book, Descartes says right out loud what has been subtext from the beginning. He's afraid to write what he really thinks because he's afraid of being condemned, because he sees this happening to other people. Note that the people who condemn are, Descartes says, people to whom I defer. They are the church authorities. He has to respect them because they have temporal power over his actions. Note also that our translator gives the proper historical fact. Descartes is thinking about Galileo. I'm sure you're familiar with Galileo. He was an Italian physicist and astronomer who made a decisive advance on our understanding of physics and how physics here on Earth helps us understand the working of the solar system. Now, Galileo, for his opinions about astronomy and how the universe works, was put on trial and narrowly escaped one of the common punishments, being burned alive. He only saved himself by being put under house arrest and being subjected to constant censorship. Religious authorities read everything that he wrote down in order to make sure it was consistent with the official orthodox beliefs. Descartes obviously wants to avoid having trouble of the same kind for himself. The highlighted text here is worth our careful attention. Note that Descartes is always a careful and in some ways tricky writer. He often writes so that a lazy reader will get the wrong impression, but an active, attentive, logical reader will figure out what he really means. The lazy reading is that Descartes gives his authority away, that he defers to the people in authority, presumably because he trusts them, not that authority is taken away from him by force or fear. The more careful reading says that Descartes here has given us two standards for authority, a lower one and a higher one, a complete authority and an almost complete authority. The complete authority is the one that reason has over his thoughts. The almost complete authority is the one that other people with legal and temporal power, have over his actions. What that means is that he keeps total control over his own thoughts, that only his reason can dictate to him the opinions that he will believe. But when it comes to showing what he believes, which is an action, he will defer to others because it's necessary that he do so. Now, this next part of the text is an important passage, and it would be worthwhile for you to pause the video and read these words in context and think them through. These words contain the key to why Descartes thinks science is good. Even though authority disagrees with him, and he's at odds with the people who are explicitly in charge of deciding what opinions are good and encouraging their subjects to be good, Descartes has his own ideas about what it is to be a good person and to do good things for others. Here Descartes says the obvious: he has his own opinions, other people have theirs. He likes his opinions best, no doubt the other people like theirs best. He says that the other people like them even more than he likes his own, which suggests, although he doesn't quite say this, that the others like their opinions too much, which is to say that they are zealots about their opinions. Here Descartes points back to the material from part 5 and says what we learned there, that his opinions about physics are different from the ordinary orthodox ones, and different in an important way. They could allow us to understand the universe and our own bodies in a new way. And let me make a side comment here. When we were having our online discussion in part 5, I didn't notice anyone actually answering the question about why Descartes preferred his way of thinking. A number of people gave interesting and serious and solid, and it seemed to me religious tinged opinions about why Descartes thought as he did. But no one did the simpler thing of just pointing to Descartes' words and saying what thoughts he had for himself. Now, those ideas and the criticisms of Descartes are serious, but if you are going to think seriously about them, you need to understand what Descartes says in his own defense. If you don't have that clearly in mind, you should go back to the Moodle material for part 5 and review that question. Here we're getting closer to the main point. Descartes feels he can't keep his thoughts to himself. He feels that his way of thinking is more useful. He feels he must be public about his science and his conclusions, even though he's privately satisfied with his scientific activities. He doesn't want to win glory by seeming smart to everybody else. He gets satisfaction simply by answering problems for himself. And yet, something compels him to be public. And the question is, what is that? This is the key, and it's perfectly straightforward. If you do science, you can help people out. Technology solves people's practical problems. That's the true charity. You do things for others only if you know how to do things for others, and the way to learn how is by doing science. Note that Descartes uses explicitly religious language. He talks about a law and about offending against that law. Now, that is crime or sin to offend against the law. So Descartes goes so far as to say he must do his science and to defy church authority, because otherwise he would be a sinner. He would offend gravely against the law that really counts, which says that it's your duty to help others, to contribute to the welfare of the human race. It's worthwhile to take a moment to consider how religious people might argue back against Descartes. Now, one thing that they might say is something like this: the study of the universe ought to show its beauty. The people who study it ought to recognize its beauty, and they should feel a certain awe at something good and orderly beyond their power to understand. That it should reflect the beauty and goodness and wisdom of God, and that this recognition should create primarily a feeling of humility in the scientist, that looking at something nobler and grander than himself. Now, we saw in part 5 that Descartes takes opposite views, that he understood the world by diminishing it to something less than himself, that he understood the universe through thinking of it as matter behaving in the ordinary way that matter does in life. And while this is difficult to understand, it doesn't command our respect in the same way that a view of the universe as a beautiful whole created by a divine being would. And so one thing religious people might say is that Descartes has set up his science to emphasize his own pride and his own power to understand, and therefore lost the chief good thing that he might have gotten from it, whatever good his technology might do. He has lost the chief humble attitude that is better than any tool or useful thing that science might produce.